just a little bit of context into why I'm doing this and
Sure.
how I got started. I feel like, especially last year when I first entered the tech industry, there was a lot of conversations around just like everyone has to do a podcast. Like the podcasts out there are just like getting so popular, and you can like post them on TikTok and everything. And I had so much imposter syndrome around that topic, being like, I just entered the industry. I'm not going to be good enough. Like, what am I going to talk to people about? Right. And so I just never did it because I was like, it's better to just not try, which is absolutely not true.
Right.
But then this year I got a chance to be on like the sponsorship side of the Code Story podcast.
Oh,
And have you heard of the Code Story podcast? Okay, sweet. So yeah, we were sponsoring like 5 different episodes, and I ended up being like in the planning and preparation team for all 5 episodes.
nice.
And I got a chance to be a guest as well. And I was like, I'm doing all of the work that's required to actually prepare a podcast, right?
Yeah,
Like
right.
coming up with the stories, the questions, dry runs, everything. And I was like, okay, well, I know how to do all this now, so I might as well get started.
Awesome.
So that's where we are at right now. It's temporarily called, or currently called, the Developer Diaries.
Ooh,
and I sort of want it to be less like a live stream where we're like, oh my God, we have all these questions, and more of just like a chill, laid back conversation about you, your life as a software engineer, and the journey that you've been on so far and the challenges that you faced. And I really want to start like drawing parallels between those challenges and the ones that I've faced in my life and the ones that our audience has been facing in their lives as well.
Awesome.
And then take the lessons that you've learned and try to apply them to those challenges that we're facing.
Awesome.
Does that sort of make sense?
That sounds amazing.
The first like diary entry I really wanted to theme is who is Craig? So do you mind just telling us a little bit about who you are? What's your background?
Sure. Yeah. Well, hello, everybody out there. My name is Craig. I am a developer educator, and I am a coder and a builder by nature. I have been in the game for a very long time. I started when I was 16, actually. My 16-year-old diary entry was I had an application out to KFC, the Kentucky Fried Chicken, and a Y2K company, and KFC didn't call back. Now,
they lost out on an amazing opportunity.
And I could have learned how all that stuff works. I have never worked a cash register, so I think I went right into this field. Now, what I was doing there was I was putting stickers on mainframe tapes. So it was a Y2K company. Like, I'm totally dating myself here, but 16 at Y2K, you can figure out it hadn't happened yet. So. Yeah. My dad worked at this company and had a job posting when I was looking for it, and it was like somebody put stickers on tapes. I was like, seems like my son could do that. So I realized that it was an awesome opportunity and a place of privilege if my dad worked there, and here I come to, yeah, sure, I'll try it, you know, and like, so yeah, that's where that got started.
Awesome. So becoming a developer. Yeah. Now, I feel like everyone has their own sort of journey when it comes to becoming a developer. Yeah. I think our journeys are sort of drastically different, but there's like 2 different points that I noticed are kind of similar, where you mentioned when we were talking earlier about how at one point you were super into, like, you had a bit of a STEM background, you were also into theaters, you were like playing the guitar, and then like snap to now where you're a developer advocate or a developer educator actually. But we're both in the DevRel industry, right? And so I'm so curious to see like what got you down this path overall. And then we'll start diving a little bit into each of those aspects.
Sure. Yeah. So back at this place where I'm putting stickers on there, it took a long time. It took like 30 minutes to wait for these things to come. And when that came, I was like, well, what am I going to do? And so I was like, well, I guess I'll learn how to play guitar. And so I did. I learned on the job, on the clock, was learning how to play guitar. And I got kind of bored with that. You know, I was like, okay, so now what do I do? And then I was in theater at the time, and I was like studying. I would study my lines, memorize those things, and then eventually I got bored there, and I started asking, "What can I do?" I was like, "Surely there's something else I can do." Like, and so they just gave us some tasks, and like that's kind of where that went from. So like I got some tasks, and then was like, maybe I should try to automate this.
Yeah.
And it was a different time, right?
You were just like bored out of your mind, and you're like, this could definitely be done more efficiently. Let me try to automate this.
Yeah, and like there's all these people around here coding and doing this stuff, and like, is this what code is for? Like I was at like that level of like, not knowing what this stuff was really, other than my dad did it and he was like super nerdy.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about how you went from becoming a developer to becoming a teacher, because that's a very, that's a pretty common, shift you see with like professors and teachers, but you're also not formally a teacher anymore, right? Like you kind of are, you're an educator. Sure. It's in your title and it's in your trade. But you're not going to schools and talking, or like colleges and talking, right? So what did that shift look like? Yeah,
that's a great question. And the journey continues. So like I did the developing thing, and I actually started like running my own company. I ended up in this really weird space where I was, we acquired a company at this Y2K place, and they had Lotus Notes. I don't know if you know what Lotus Notes is.
No, I have no idea.
Kind of disappeared. It's like a workplace tool. It's like when I saw Retool. Do you know Retool? Yeah. It's kind of like that, where it's like this like workflow thing internally. Typically, like you're like, oh, I need somebody to sign this, so it goes through these things, and it was a really nice thing, but it was made by this company called Lotus. Eventually got bought by IBM. Got it. We acquired a company, and they said, will you learn how to do this? Because I was in that place where I was learning, and they said, will you learn? So great opportunity, like just gave it to me. And the person who was teaching me quit. Not because they were teaching me.
Like, oh, Craig's too good. I can't do this anymore.
But basically, now I'm this admin of this thing that I literally just started using. I have no idea what it is. So like just in the deep end of this. But it turns out that there's not many people that are doing that. And because I was there, and the crazy opportunity, right? Just like out there opportunity. I felt like I was able to go and keep going. And I ended up getting a lot of gigs because I ended up in some really strange places. Like I was working for some unknown or all unnamed telephone companies, but I worked with one, and I fixed their database to be just the way that they wanted it. And then they got acquired, and they said, no, we want it to do this. And I fixed it to do that. And then they got acquired by the same company again, and they made me put it back. So like I got paid a bunch of money, and I was like, what is this money just going all over the place? And back in high school, back in those early days, I was fascinated with Peace Corps. I always loved the concept of Peace Corps. We had a French teacher who went, and he came and he shared pictures of like Peace Corps, and it was just something I always loved. But like I'm not very good in the outsides. Like keep me inside. I'm inside. So like there was like stuff where I was like, do you know how to the typical thing is like dig a ditch or things like that, or teach English. And it's like I don't have any teaching background or anything like that. And while I was going through this we'll say existential crisis of like, what am I doing? I'm just like moving this money around, and like it's wild that I have this, like looking back on it, I have this opportunity to do this, and I'm able to continue to get jobs. I got to a place where I was able to hire people to get paid, and I was getting paid off of the nice. What is this?
How old were you at this point?
20s, in my 20s.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And I guess we can go here. This is a diary entry. We'll go here. So I dated a woman, and she was a therapist, or she was studying to be a therapist, and we worked through some stuff. But what I'm talking about, the crisis here. Right. And she basically was like, well, it sounds like you should use your skills for whatever. Like, have you ever dreamed of using your skills someplace? And I was like, oh, yeah, the Peace Corps. And then she's like, well, let's look at it. And there was a technology thing that was coming out that year. They were introducing technology to the Peace Corps. It's like, whoa. And,
so the timing there is really perfect.
Yeah, it was just perfect. And just like one of those like, and then, our relationship fell apart because I went to join the Peace Corps, but she guided me there. And then she's like, you're running away from love. I'm like, no, I'm running towards love.
Yeah, different type of love, but
So the weird thing about the Peace Corps is you need to have a college degree. And we skipped this part, but when I was going through working at this place, I was also about ready to go into college, and I started college. Right. I was taking some courses that like, you'll hear this, right? You'll hear this from students of like, it's just outdated, right? Like you're learning stuff that's like outdated, and like outdated then was like super outdated. So like I was learning COBOL, like just bizarre. And like
Yeah.
some of the people where I was working at were coding in COBOL, but like really like the new stuff, people weren't coding in COBOL. So it's kind of like, I know that this isn't worth it. And I was starting to not like it, but I was loving what I was doing at work and not liking what I was learning. And I was like, well, maybe this is never even going to lead me there. And maybe that was a little bit of like a naive, I was a little punk rock at the time too. I just kind of said, I don't think I want to do this. And at the time I was also double majoring because I love theater. Like I'm super into theater. I love, specifically like comedy. I like that sort of stuff. And I was double majoring, which is a very strange double major for computer science and theater. And I was hating them both, and I was working full time. And it was like, what is the point? Yeah, I was not loving it, and I was working full time and felt like, is this going to help me? And I don't know. I thought maybe not. And like, I could do better work if I wasn't also trying to write these papers about waiting for Godot. Like I would be, it would be better, right? Like, so I dropped out. And
I'll pause there really quickly, and we'll dive deeper into that entire like journey and experience. But it is so important, like it's so valuable that you were actually working at the same time, because had you not been, you wouldn't have necessarily made that parallel of like, hey, maybe what I'm doing right now isn't, you know, up to date with the technologies that I need to know.
Yeah.
What about theater? What did you not like about theater?
Yeah, it's, you know, like later in life, you kind of learn about the weed out classes. You know, they put you in these gigantic classes that they're like, if you're going to make it, you're going to make it through this. And I had to do it, you know, like it's just horrible. Like I don't like that bit of college. And I thought that was all of college. Right. So like I quit probably a little bit early when I hear, because now when I talk to people like, oh, I loved college. It's like, you did? Like that was horrible. But like that first year is meant to be bad. I think.
It is. Honestly, I have a similar story where I failed my second class, which was a weeder class. And I remember like going into it thinking, what did you call it? I thought you called it weeder as well.
I didn't. I had a different name, but now it forever it's weeder. You've re-indexed
it. Just like literally weeds out the students that are like not supposed to be in this major. I remember doing so well in my first class, and the second class immediately failed. And just the entire journey from there was, is it that I am bad at this? Is it that I don't like it? And I kept struggling between those two. And if you're bad at something, you can get better at it. But if you decide that you don't like it, it is really hard to get better at it and like convince yourself to put that time into it. And so I ended up staying in college instead of dropping out, mostly because I'm an immigrant. I needed to have the degree to like get a job here. But I hated the entire computer science experience. And it wasn't until my senior year when I started learning coding outside of classes where I was like, oh, this can be fun. This doesn't have to be as bad as I thought it was going to be.
What were you coding? Sorry, I'm going to flip it. I'll flip the question.
Like a lot of the, like you said, right? Things are outdated. They teach you things in college that might be really useful in some jobs and could be completely useless in others. We spent most of the time learning like C, C++, those like languages.
Math.
Exactly. And it wasn't until we got into web development where I was like, oh, this is cool. This is something that I actually enjoy. So in my senior year, we were talking about my friend Daniel. He was a developer advocate, and he was like, hey, you should try this. It's fun. And he was live streaming, so I would join him. And he would literally be like, okay, you teach yourself how to code, like do this. And I'd be like, I don't know how to do this. And he'd be like, well, Google it. So I'd just sit there on live stream for like hours, like trying to Google things and figure things out. And it was the most humiliating experience, but also really great to just like, you know, figure out what aspect of coding I liked, which is where I am today in my career as well, and build back that relationship that like college really broke off for me. But yeah, let's get back to talking to you about now, which is like after dropping out, you were talking about, you know, your entire experience and then going into the Peace Corps.
So one of the prerequisites for Peace Corps. So when I made the decision, I was like, it said that you needed a college degree. And I was like, I don't have one, but I also have all of this experience. Cause like now we're looking, I think it was like 24, 25 when I started thinking about doing this. And I've been doing it now for 9 years, right? Like maybe more like 8 because of, you know, putting stickers on tape. Don't really qualify you, but like, so yeah, that's, and so I just kind of was like, well, what if I tried? Like, I'll just apply and try and see what happens. And I got it. And it was, the thing was teaching too, when I was like, oh, okay, I'll be a teacher. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I would love to be to go teach this stuff. I don't know how to do that. I loved so like one of the things that's interesting is like I loved the teachers that some of the teachers that I had in high school like really motivated me to like and saved me from like some dark places too, right? You know, like high school's rough.
Right, right.
I'm watching I've got a daughter who's like starting to get into middle school and like, oh, I forgot how dark that was. This was rough, and those teachers really helped. Like and so I always appreciated the profession. I know that I said I dropped out. I'm sure that those weeder teachers are great, but you know they've got a job to do. So, so I always liked the profession, but never thought about it as a profession.
Right.
So, yeah. So I applied for it. It takes a while. I went to some places to learn about it, and then got placed in Guyana. Where did you immigrate from?
My family's from North India, but I was born and raised in Mumbai until I was like 7 years old.
Okay.
And then we started moving. My dad got a job in England, and I thought it was like, oh, we're going to go to a completely different country. I didn't think too much of it until I moved to England, and I was like, this is so cool. Like it's such a different, environment. Yeah. And then after that, every like 2 to 4 years, we would move to different countries. Okay. So we moved to like Tunisia at first. I finished off middle school there, and then went to Trinidad early high school years.
Oh my gosh, Trinidad! Yeah. Oh, Trinity to the bone.
Honestly,
are you Trinity to the bone?
I'm not. I wish I was. And then I moved to Turkey to finish off my high school years. Took a gap year there. Awesome. Sort of like having an existential crisis at that point as well. I love listening to your story because there's so many interesting parallels with my own, and like I know I've heard other students talk about their stories, and everyone sort of goes through this in their own way in their own life. But yeah, and then I came to college, and that was pretty much it. I was like a straight A student until 10th grade, and then like very like last crucial years of high school, like my grades dropped, and I was like not about to graduate from high school. So that was a little messy. I did graduate, luckily. But that was sort of like, that's where the crisis came from. Like, oh my God, I've been a straight A student and a goody two shoes, and all of a sudden I'm not that, and I'm skipping classes, and I don't know what's happening. Yeah. And then I went to college thinking it would be like a fresh start. And then I failed my second class, and I was like, oh my God, this is not it. This is not the experience that I envisioned for myself. But you know what? Like today, where I am right now, I am so glad I went through those experiences earlier on, because I would not know how to deal with them at this stage if I hadn't gone through them then.
Right? Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. And I think like going back to the story that you were actually talking about how your girlfriend at the time sort of helped you talk through that experience. Yeah. You initially were like, I don't know how to teach. I don't know if this is the right thing for me. And then just like being able to go out there and talk to people and have a different perspective tell you, actually, you can do those things. Yeah. So important, right? Yeah, for sure. And that's literally what kept me in college as well, which is like, I was like, oh my God, I can't do computer science. I'm not able, like I'm terrible in these classes. And it was just talking to other people, like family and friends, that were like, no, you can do it. Like just because you got that fail one time doesn't mean that it's going to define the rest of your life. Right. Which at the time, it really feels like it will. Yeah.
And like, I to get back to that, let's get back to that girlfriend a little bit.
Yeah.
I just buzzed a little bit. Sorry.
No worries.
We're buzzing all over the place. These notifications.
These notifications.
So one of the things I'm sure I was running through some sort of freshman psychology thing as we were going, as we were dating, which is, it's always interesting. It was I feel like she probably got a lot from that, and I got a lot from that. One of the things that she was making me realize was that, like, yeah, but how did you learn this stuff? Like, you're able to do this. Like, you're able to do this and make money, and you want to share that with people. Like, how are you able to do that? And I have this really strange ability, and I don't really know what it is. But if you give me a book, if you give me like a book of like 1,000-page book about programming, I can read it in a couple days and understand it and like remember back to where it is. And it's strange, and it's a weird thing to be able to do, and be able to like access it pretty quickly. Which I know is, I know that is some sort of just weird gift that I've been able to do, and I needed to do it for work. And I think it was from this like stress of like, you have this here, you're an administrator of this product. You're going to give a talk next week on, it's like, so I got to go read this book about all this stuff, and like just jamming that information in there. I think I had to do that enough. And this is like, pre-internet too. Like I did a lot of the stuff pre-internet, like we're literally talking about books, sitting in a Barnes and Noble, highlighting and reading, and like maybe not highlighting because I didn't buy it, but like reading the whole book section across. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
God, so that's so interesting you say that, because you know that requirement with the Peace Corps that you had to have a college degree. You have literally all of the college experience just without having gone to college, because that's what you do, right? You sit there, you cram information, you try to learn it as quickly as possible, and then just like be ready to jut it out when you need to. But yeah, sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, it totally. And like I feel like when you do the interview, that's what they said, right? So they said, oh well, you have all this stuff, it's fine. So what happens is when you go to country, so I went to a country called Guyana, which is loves Trinidad, very similar to Trinidad culture. Not as many doubles, unfortunately. I wish. I know. I'm so glad you know what that is. I know, and they would come sometimes. So good. Yeah. So there was some Trinidadian restaurants there that we'd be able to do. But, so I was in Guyana, which is a tiny little country in South America. It's an amazing country. It's beautiful, and it has a interesting history. And there's so many people that leave the country versus how many people live there. There's like 500,000 people that live there.
Okay.
And there's 800,000 Guyanese in Queens, like alone, just Queens alone. So like there's more, the goal is to kind of get out of there, and understandably so, because we don't need to get into that here on this is a different podcast, but like colonization, and they've taken all the natural resources, and there's no hope. And the hope is to get out of there. And
they've been stripped of their resources, basically.
And the dream is to get out. And I do not fault anybody for wanting to leave, but at the same time, it's hard to leave. And so you end up in this place where you're kind of stuck there, and there's no work. And that was kind of what this was about. This was like, can you show how you use computers to these students? And so I got this incredible placement at a technical institute in a little part of the country called New Amsterdam, the second largest city, about 20,000 people in it. It's awesome, awesome little town. My now wife, but then just Peace Corps mate, we're the only two white people that walked into the town together, so we were immediately married. She was my wife as soon as we met everybody. Like, how's your wife? Which like we're not married. Excuse me, we're not married. Now we are. So we're actually going in June.
They just saw the future, basically. Exactly. They're like, you guys look good together.
So this is 20 years ago, because we're going in June, and it's like our 20th anniversary. We're going to bring the kids there, so like very excited that everybody that did call it are now going to get to see that this is right.
I told you.
I told you. Yeah, like, sucking their teeth at us. Told you. I was just thrown in the deep end, and I like the deep end. Like I like, if you're going to give me a problem, just give it to me. Like don't ease me in. Just like let's go do it. Let's go learn how to do this. And it was hard, because you get this. You're not in the culture. Like, I'm not part of the culture. I'm just some dude walking in, and I wanted to be really careful of that. And they teach it. You have Peace Corps training about being very careful about that, because like you don't know what people need. Like, I don't think that you do. And they tell this awesome story that happened. I think in Malawi, they brought ovens to places where they didn't have ovens before, and they came back weeks later, and they were using them for planters for plants. Because they're like, I don't need an oven. I already know how to do this. What are you doing? I don't need, because they already have their way of doing stuff. Like, that thing's really hot, and like, why do I need this? And so, but they were using it in the way that, and so like that of like, don't try to change stuff until you understand what's happening.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that was awesome, and an awesome like combination for me, like educationally, because first of all, I had never taught. And I got up in front of a classroom full of students who were laughing at how I was speaking, of course, right? Like, so they speak Creolese in Guyana, which is very similar to like it's like a light patois, I'd say, with like a little bit of like pronoun flipping around. Okay. So like, like.
What's patois?
Oh, it's a Jamaican.
Oh, right.
Jamaican. Yeah. So it's that kind of like accent over the sing-songy accent over the top of it. So it's got a little bit of that, but it's Creolese, which is basically English, but like things like give it she and stuff like really hard T's like batroom and things that are pronounced a little bit differently, like graffiti or bikini, you know, so you're like, what, but then eventually you get it, you understand what it is.
Get used to it.
But at first I sound so weird to them, right? So I'm in front of this class. I have in 2 years, I have my guidelines are in 2 years, the students will know how to save in Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Excel, Microsoft Access. It's like, I have 2 years. I don't have, and there's no internet. I have no internet. I have no books.
Oh.
I have some software, and that is it. And it's like, whoa, how do I do that? And so I just used the help menu and kind of like went through that. But I started winging it, and I started like trying to figure out like, well, what do you use? The computers are new there, right? So like some people came into this class and it was the first time they saw a computer, which is incredible. Like that is so neat that like there was these Dell computers that were donated to them, and they sat there and they're waiting for somebody to come show them how to use them. So it was like so rad to like, there were some people had them in their houses and they were starting to show up, but they weren't really ever used. And it was kind of fascinating to be in that spot of like, oh yeah, I guess we all kind of take that for granted that we understand what this is for, and it's not this like, and just getting to go to the root of that it's not something to be afraid of, and like but people also do stuff without them. Like they would plan the teacher planning. They'd get this gigantic piece of paper and they would draw the schedule out by hand, and then the lady would type it one by one on the schedule thing through a typewriter. I was like, wow, like that's amazing that you're still doing that, but like also check this out. Wait till you see this.
You get so excited about how they could do that exact same thing with a computer and just sort of like make that process more efficient. But to them, it's like, why do I need that?
Exactly.
I'm already doing it.
Exactly. Exactly. Why he talks weird and why do I care? So
that's an interesting point, like building trust as someone who hasn't been a teacher before, and as someone who's not from there. Like what was that like?
I mean, I fell on my face like so many times. You know, I had to, I used to have to wear a helmet, right? Because you wear a helmet to ride your bike there. And if you get caught by Peace Corps without wearing a helmet, you're going to get kicked out. Like this, like wild rules. And they're like, we don't wear helmets here. Like, what are you doing? And so they would
and you're just like goofy guy, just like biking with a helmet.
And these are like first year, like freshmen in college age kids. So like they finished their secondary or their high school years there. And they're just goofing around, and there's this like silly dorky white dude in their class, and they put the helmet on and they like make fun of me, and I just kind of leaned into it. I was like, it is weird. Like I have never, and also being on that side of it was like so amazing to have that experience of like, oh, I know what it's like when I walk into a room and everybody stares at me. I know what that is, and I appreciate that, and like also like, I don't know, and like help me. Like I don't know your culture. Help me with like I just I've lived in other places after Guyana, and that I always have that. Whenever I see somebody struggling at the bank or something with like a language, like let me help. Can I help? I speak a little bit of Spanish. I can probably get us through where you need to go. But yeah. So and I'm sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there. But so getting in front of people where I don't know what they're into. So like what I did was I would use the lessons to kind of teach me, to teach me about the culture. And I was just kind of transparent.
Okay.
So it was like, there's a minibus culture there, and we're on Excel. So we've gone to Excel. I showed them how to do their schedules, because that's the one thing I understand, that you need to know what your schedule is. Let's build Excel schedules. Here's where your classes are. They're having fun in there. They're doing like incredible word art stuff. Like I didn't even know word art could do some of the stuff that they were doing.
Nice.
There's a pretty interesting mode of transportation there called a minibus. When I say there, I'm talking 20 years ago. So at the time, I'm not sure if this still exists, but they're like minivans with like 5 rows of seats in them. And some of them, they had different names for them, and I didn't know what they all meant. And so, there's one called a boom boom, and it had a really loud speaker system. And like, if you ended up, everybody wanted to get into it. So it was like overcrowded. It was so loud, you couldn't see. Yeah. And they would like play the same kind of like, at the time it was called the Juicy Rhythm. They'd play this like the same song over and over again, just with like different people on top of it.
Yeah.
If we were,
this like a party bus.
Yeah, the party bus, exactly. And then there was one called the Cork Ball, which cork ball, like, so it's like there's this like, it's not up to, nobody really wants to get on it. It's not crowded. It's also not like decked out. So it's like, well, let's take a look at, does anybody in here know any drivers of these things? And they're like, yes, my dad is, or yeah, my brother, or I have one, right? Yeah. It's like, let's break out the costs. And so we used the spreadsheet to show that the cork ball was actually more efficient than what it was. And we were able to do that. And they were like, what? And then they were playing with the stuff, like loving the fact that they were talking about that. Yeah. So that was like, whoa, this is powerful. If I can like line up with what you're interested in, you will take this information. Because I was having a hard time. I was having a hard time breaking through, because it's like, what is this guy talking about? Right. And they were making flyers for their parties that were coming up, right? So they would do these things called glow parties, which, like, again, what the heck is a glow party? Today we're going to use word art. We're going to figure out how to make a flyer that looks good, and we'll figure out how to line the stuff up, right? Like, because that's a skill that you've never played with it before, right? And this is the only time too, like that. This class is when you get to play. Yeah. So that was cool. Taking a class.
That's really awesome. I think it's when you're a teacher, right? I think one of the most difficult things to learn, but also one of the most valuable lessons to learn, is that like every student is an individual and they all have their own ways of learning, right? Like you can't have a one size fits all for people. And I think that's what you're sort of talking about, where you couldn't, even if you had your own game plan, even if you had teaching experience in the US, you couldn't have applied that to the students over there. Or if you did, they would have been bored out of their minds. They would have sat there and just like talked to each other and like not paid attention. Yeah. And just like being able to be present in that moment and be like, let me learn from you. Let me figure out what you're interested in, and then let me apply these skills to the problems that you're trying to solve. Even if that is making a flyer for a party, right? That's a problem that needs to be solved. Yeah. That's such a like important lesson that I feel like more teachers need to think about too, right? Regardless of where you're teaching or who you're teaching to. Yeah. All right. And then sort of like literally just talking a little bit about the value of the skills that you have and how they applied to your teaching job at the Peace Corps, but then also how these lessons that you've learned apply to the job that you're in right now, right? Like as a teacher. Yeah. Do you have any, like, can you draw any parallels from what you've learned in Guyana or just in your time there to what you're doing now? Yeah,
I am a huge fan of having to teach to constraints. So like there were blackouts that would often happen. So like I'm teaching a class, blackout. What do we do? How do we do this? Now we are different. Now we have this different constraint. And the constraint is there's no power. And I have a room full of students that we're trying to teach. And so like I would have to come up with like, how do we do that? So like, okay, so now it's off. We're gonna take a look at the insides of this computer, because we're gonna try to have to fix these. These are going to break here. These computers eventually are going to break. Let's figure out how to switch this fan out. Let's put this memory in. One of my favorite ones that like I wish I had this earlier, but I would just start playing Jeopardy on the board. We had these gigantic whiteboards, and the show for some reason Jeopardy was on like 7 hours a day on the TV, like just repeats of it. And they love the style and the what's it. So like they understood the game, and it was this like shared culture that we had. And I could put what we were learning on it, and they would go nuts. And all the teachers would come up, like the other teachers would be like, "What's happening up here? Is everything okay?" Like what they're learning, like
having fun while learning what?
And it was this again like that. Like as soon as you can like get it in the right spot of them having fun, is the trick. And like I've used that my whole rest of my career. So yeah.
That is amazing. Yeah. All right. I think this is the end of the who is correct journey, right? And after this, we're going to start talking about something that you mentioned a little bit earlier, where your entire journey has essentially been winging it. Yeah.